Yeah, that helps. And maybe you don't know the answer to this too. I suspect we might get some information on this, but when we say, when we're just talking in the abstract explosives, I mean, that's a pretty, I see some of the definitions and things we see in there. I mean, that obviously at first glance raises all kinds of concerns and these sorts of things. And certainly, whether we've had complaints or not, we don't want to be turning a blind eye to pipe bombs or whatever you want to say are being made in Kaysville, right? But it sounds like we haven't had that issue anyway. But nevertheless, I don't think we would want to go there. At least at least in my opinion. But if that's not what we're talking about, maybe, I guess I'm trying to narrow down what the concern was, and is what is being proposed adequate? Does it go too far? Is it not far enough? Is it even needed? Do we need to go more? I'm trying to figure that out. And I guess then the question there would be, do we know what ATF is even worried about? Or did they have anything specific that they were bringing to the city? Or are there other things that maybe the staff was talking about that ATF didn't discuss?
Yeah, I believe that they were specifically bringing an application for manufacturing of explosives for a resident in Kaysville, and wanted to know what our local regulations were regarding that. I just lost my train of thought on the other comment that I was going to make. Oh, yeah, so City Attorney Nick Mills is the one who drafted this. He's the one who took the lead on this, working back and forth with the ATF agent. I have not had any conversations with the federal agent, but Nick felt, working back and forth with him, that this would be adequate to address the concerns that came forward as they discussed that one permit in particular. And I know some of these, or I believe the definitions in here were taken from ATF regulations and the permits that they have.
Maybe you don't know, maybe this is a Nick question, of course he's not here, but did Nick or anyone in the staff research what other municipalities have done? And like, let's say Davis County or even Wasatch Front, do we know?
So I don't know if they did that, but I think, in my experience, the other 3 communities where I've had experience with land use regulation, I don't think that it would have been a permitted use in a residential zone. I don't think it would have been a conditional use in a residential zone. So
Yep.
Some ordinances, some other cities have ordinances that are more specific than others. But I just don't think that would be a logical thing to do. Now, if you're saying, hey, all of our residential zones are 5-acre minimum, that might be an appropriate allowance. But where we're talking, 30,000 square foot lots, 25,000, 8,000 square foot lots, it's not a comparable scenario.
So, can I jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chair, is that all right?
Yep, please.
It's not, many ordinances, most ordinances that I've seen have a provision in there that says something to the effect of things that are permitted are allowed, and nothing that is not, if it's not specifically permitted, then it's not allowed. It can't be used. And we have that provision, or something like that in our ordinance, where it says in 1773, it says that no building or structure or land or building or premises can be used, designated, or be used for any purpose or in any manner other than is included in the uses listed as permitted in the district in which such land, buildings, or premises located. Which basically tells me that unless we've said you can do it, you can't. Manufacturing of explosives, we don't list that anywhere. So, I would assume that means you can't do it. So this, to me, just seems like it's kind of like, a second assurance for some reason. I'm just wondering why why we need that extra assurance. Is there something that's prompting that? Did we have something happen somewhere where, somebody slipped through that crack or something? That's just, I guess, I'm wondering why we need to have that second assurance.
Yeah. So again, I think there has been at least one person, a resident of Kaysville, that has been granted a permit from the BATF to manufacture explosives for a number of years, until whatever happened this fall that changed, like I said, if it was either a different agent, perspective, or regulations that changed. So there has been a permit granted in the past. I think this is the first time that the BATF came to check with the city.
And that was going to be my next question was, does the ATF usually check the local ordinances? And
Yeah, Will, to answer your question, yes.
They do.
So on the federal firearms license permit, it asks what type of zoning that you fall under. So
So if that's the case, Steve, why would they permit it?
that's why they ask the question, further question. So I used to be owner of a manufacturing business with an FFL.
Okay.
And we had a partner who was in the 06 class who was a destructive. And the city of Spanish Fork invited us kindly to go out on the west side and have our offices instead of we could have a storefront, but we couldn't have anything in the storefront that was connected to our manufacturing. But it's part of the FFL, Federal Firearms License process under the National Firearms Act. And so you're dealing with this, and it's a cross-check by the ATF to ensure that the activities by the units of general local government are taking place in an approved, appropriate place.
So that seems to imply then if the ATF was permitting an operation or a manufacturing here in the city, they must not have been checking with the city to see if that was.
Potentially, the agents sometimes don't ask the question, or it's a new question on the NFA, National Firearms
Okay.
Act. They may now be checking because there may potentially be some liability if they don't check.
Yeah.
Well, but I think regardless, it's, from what I gather, and I think this is pretty accurate, that the reason they came to the city is because it's still within our purview. That's why we're here. That's
Sure.
why we're talking about it. So it's going to be up to the council ultimately, as Quan said earlier, to say whether, this is acceptable or not. But it's up to us, ultimately.
Well, it sounds to me like, reading our ordinance, it's not permitted already in the city.
Yeah, because it's silent. In other
Or
words,
really in any zone. I don't see it listed anywhere in any of our zones.
Yeah.
And so by proposing and doing this, what this really is it's like a second assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether we need it or not, but I think it's not correct to assume that the city allows it now and we're going to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way I read the ordinance, it's not allowed now.
Mm-hmm.
And this ordinance really doesn't change that. It just kind of does a second assurance.
If anything, it would just clarify it,
Yeah.
add more meat to it, I suppose.
I mean, I'm happy that the ATF actually respected our local sovereignty, so kudos to that. So let's continue this discussion, please. Going back to where we think it should be allowed. Thoughts?
So, this is, I guess, your call for sure, but we have to have a public hearing, I think. Is your thought we're going to discuss, then have the public hearing?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
please. Thoughts on where we will allow?
Well, I think it would be sort of the low-hanging fruit would be, okay, industrial zone,
Manufacturing.
yeah, maybe out business park with limits, potentially commercial zone, I think those would be more of the easy questions. This is saying no, as it's proposed, 0 residential zones.
And mixed use.
Yeah, which I think our ordinance already does.
Yeah, because, again, you're just saying if it doesn't address it, it means it's not permitted, not allowed.
If it's not listed.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look at our zones and we really don't have what you would call like a heavy industrial zone.
Yeah,
We have light industrial
That's it.
research,
Yeah.
office.
Uh-huh.
Is it appropriate in any of those? Maybe. And I don't know whether we should specifically call it out and allow for that in one of those zones. I mean, I'm almost of the opinion that wait and see if somebody wants to do it, then we can talk about it then, but it doesn't seem to have been an issue for however long we've had an ordinance.
Yeah.
Up until now, I think.
We have some of that, like for like.
So I also want us to take into consideration, you brought up a good point that couple zones near, what is it, Industrial Park, Barnes Park, that's where we, right now, or we've talked about potentially turning that to mixed zone, so that way development could be made for, based around the park. So I think we also have to take into consideration, if we were to do that, what happens? And then I think the other part too is I don't want to jump ahead, but we have to think about, so right now it says this ordinance does not apply to commercially manufactured black powder in quantities under 50 pounds. I think we should think about talking about the limitations. Now, I'm not an EOD expert. Having said that, spending 10 years overseas, getting blown up, I do know that certain yields will give you certain damage. So I think we do need to take that into consideration. So whether we actually move this forward or table it so we can have further discussions, which I'm almost leaning towards, because again, I think the yield part is important. Again, one of our things that we always do is we look out for short-term, mid-term, or potential things that somebody isn't thinking about, and that's why we have, the board is made up of people with varying backgrounds, and my background happened to be getting shot at, so well, there you go. So I'm giving you insight into explosives, and explosives are not fun, so
They hurt your hearing.
that's my personal feeling. I don't know if the rest of the board agrees with that, but I'll put it on public record.
I think the 50-pound is reasonable because black powder is more volatile. I mean, as you've seen, I think we need to, and it obviously comes from the National Firearms Act and the FFL, the ATF. So I think there's a reason that's in there, because most reasonable people who do reloading and do shooting would keep that quantity. Over that, you're probably into manufacturing.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is this does not state, though. So are you saying that somebody could have 1,000 pounds? I mean, in a commercial zone, industrial zone?
Well, right now, the way our ordinance is written, it doesn't say anything about explosives.
You're just talking about prohibiting. You're not talking about allowing.
And so.
I'm talking about allowing.
So, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to look at this list of exceptions, for reasonably small things. And if we added explosives, what the ATF is saying is these are the kinds of things that you normally wouldn't include under that categorization of explosives, which leads me to think, well, so where our ordinance doesn't address it at all now, what does that mean? Does that mean that we don't allow this at all in any of our ordinances or any of our zones? Or is this something that's generally acceptable and is allowed? I don't know. That's a really good question. And maybe we do need to address that, because I have to admit, I do know people that, do make their own small arms ammunition.
Right, and that's fine. I mean, that's reloading that.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about manufacture. I mean, to me, like I said, if anything, I'd like to have a limitation, because I think we have to plan for or guesstimate anticipate where, let's say somebody does have a business license, they go into an area, but then 1,000 feet down the road or 500 feet down the road, you've got a school or you have residential. Are they still allowed to do it? And then if they are, again, what's the maximum amount of materials? Because if there's an accident, that's what you have to do.
But then they fall under OSHA. That's a whole nother,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty complex issue.
Quan, how big of an explosion can you get out of 50 pounds of black powder?
You could level a garage.
Yeah?
A couple things.
I mean,
I agree with Wilf in the sense that I do think it's an established principle or law that if we're just talking about the listing of what's permitted in any particular zone, what's permitted is permitted, what's stated is permitted, and if it's not stated, then it's not, the principle is it's not generally allowed. I don't think that principle applies, though, as broadly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Wilf, as you were stating, because if you apply that principle too broadly, then that means if we don't say you can do it, then you can't do it. Well, that's pretty anti-American.
Well, and a lot of times it takes some interpretation.
Yeah. So I think we have to be careful how far we expand that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say, and maybe this is related, is if it's never been a problem, and the ATF just brings it to our attention, and we have to then sort of turn it into a problem, is it really a problem?
Hey,
That-
can I make one clarification?
Sure.
The ATF regulates explosives, and gunpowder, like for reloading and stuff, is a propellant. It's not classified as explosives.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And black powders either flash or something, but it's still not an explosive. It's a propellant. I just wanted to just keep that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because and the ATF does regulate explosives, and they do regulate black powder for commercial places. If they have more than 50, they're supposed to put them in what they call a powder magazine.
I see.
And all that is a box, certain gauge steel, and wood so it doesn't spark, but that's over after 50 pounds. But everything regulated in black powders already regulated with ATF, and powder's a propellant. I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's
Right.
good. That's helpful, thanks.
I mean, and this, on the key points, it does say this ordinance does not apply to, again, commercially manufactured black powder under quantities of 50 pounds, et cetera.
Yeah.
Small arms ammunition.
I know we've got a gentleman here tonight that
Yep.
wants to talk to us about this, who's been involved in this, and
Right.
I'd be interested to hear what he has to say, because I think it might help
Yeah.
inform us a little bit about where maybe we need to think about going
Right.
with this.
Okay. Mr. McGraw, would you like to come forward? Please state your name and the address.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Quan, do we need to open the public hearing?
Yes. Just a point of fact. So I'm going to open up the public hearing right now, and obviously I've invited Mr. McGraw to come up. I think he's the only one that's is here tonight to speak about this, correct? Okay. Sir, also, if you could pull the mic towards you, because it's recording, and then somebody's got to transcribe it.
I get passionate about this subject, so
Yes, sir.
I get a little loud, and I'm not angry.
No, please
I'm
do.
just very passionate. I appreciate your time here, and I can answer Mr. Summercorn and Mr. Sunilow's question about the concerns of it. ATF did not approach the city. ATF, Officer Ingram, I've been a federal licensed explosive manufacturer as a hobby. It started at the age of 12 with a chemistry set, and for the past 40 years has been in the city of Kaysville, shot fireworks shows for you as a volunteer and stuff like that with that license. Every 3 years you have to get it renewed. And so when you go through that process, this time Officer Ingram said that you need to let the city know what you're doing. And so it's strictly a hobby. Two things I have that I like to do is flash powder. It's brilliant, it's loud, and it makes a lot of smoke. And also color smoke. Those are the two things I do. And I've only shot them during legal holidays when they're there. And I have to apologize to you because I've been violating the ordinance, which is your 17-26-2, that you can't use explosive materials outside your house, on your property, which is already on the books. I didn't know that ordinance. okay? So I approached the city. I asked Dan, he says, Dan, I'll get somebody to talk to you. Dan says, talk to the city attorney, talk to the city attorney. City attorney set up an appointment with him to sit down, which ATF attended at the time. And then all this for the past 3 or 4 weeks has been changing with this ordinance that comes. And so the ordinance is probably my fault. If I hadn't said anything, if I had let my license expire, but I like my hobby. It's not anything out of the ordinary, it's just a plain hobby. But for some reason, that was one of the reasons I sent all the emails out, and if I bombard you with it, please don't hold it against me. There's a lot of information that's in this book that you have questions about, that the ordinance that is before you doesn't really need to be there. I've sent out a spreadsheet. In the new ordinance gives me some concerns, because with the new ordinance and the old ordinance, a person, an individual in this city, at the age of, well, like if they were me, at the age of 12 and got a chemistry set, and then when I got mine, I started messing with it. And I started making black powder. I made little black powder rockets. I did all this stuff, and that started everything. A mentor at Fireworks West, who owned the company at the time, said, Bruce, if you're serious about fireworks as a hobby, you need to be licensed. And this was back in 1982. And I was a member of the JCs at the time. We shot the shows and everything else, which my license covered. And we did it for free with a team of volunteers for 25 years. So the concern is, well, Bruce, we know you, we trust you, everything else. We're worried about somebody else if we let you do it. And that's a great concern. But I remember a time when fireworks were illegal. I remember a time when you couldn't carry a weapon on your hip. And I remember the times before in the legislature when they were presenting, well, let's allow fireworks. And all the soothsayers and all the mayhem promoters were talking about all the things that would happen if we let them happen. And that hasn't come to pass. As far as I know, I'm the only federal licensed explosive place, but I have all the techniques. If I wanted to, yeah, I could make everything you want, and so could anybody else. But I choose just 2 items, and that's all I've ever done. So the concerns I have is on the new ordinance, section 17-7-5-6B, it talks about small arms ammunition and components, but it doesn't break out what components are. And its components include unlimited pounds of high explosive, commonly called smokeless powder. Right now, that's not on there. But an individual, it's a legal explosive that I can have 50 pounds of black powder if I wanted in my house, or a person could have 1,000 pounds of smokeless powder. And that's within the ordinance. And all I've wanted to do is set off 1 or 2 ounces of flash powder and 1 or 2 ounces of smoke. And that's what's caused this firestorm that I've caused. The second thing is, this ordinance, both ordinances, the one I violated for 4 years, since 2016 when that went into effect, is the individual who has an interest in fireworks as a hobby. They're violating the ordinance. I violated the ordinance by making an explosive and setting it off outside my house. Somebody who doesn't know about the old ordinance and the new ordinance can get a chemistry set or can look online and find the components that make explosives. And they can store them in their house. A federal licensed person like me, a spreadsheet I emailed you, cannot have explosive material in their house. So I'm not violating any existing rules. The only one I violated was setting out outside my house. And I don't have to do that from that standpoint to enjoy my hobby. That's okay. But the individual who doesn't know about this ordinance, and he sets it off and rattles the windows, lady calls, and the cops show up, and the cops say, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm just making this thing. He says, well, that's a violation of the ordinance. Is that what we want? Do we want somebody who's ignorant of the current code to have it? And the third thing, and then I'll shut up, I strongly, and I can't say this strongly enough, that if this behemoth ordinance passes, I hope it doesn't. But if it does, you send a copy of it to every resident in the city of Kaysville, so at least they know, and they can caution their children not to make explosives and sell them outside their house because they're breaking the law. And I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is to let people experiment. Lastly, any intelligent person can make things bigger. They can make it more complex and more violent. But it takes a touch of genius. And a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. Ernst F. Schumacher said that. If you have any questions, like I said, I've done this for 40 years. I know this book pretty well. You're welcome to a book. I'd love to be part of the thing that drafts an ordinance that fits, if that's an opening to you from that standpoint. And I thank you.
Just one second, Mr. McGraw. Does anybody, any of the commissioners have questions for Mr. McGraw?
Mr. McGraw, you referred to that section in the ordinance, and I found that, looked at it. Found that in the ordinance. But do you operate, do you have a home occupation permit with the city for doing what you do? I mean, you're.
I have a state license. It's under Gold Dreams, which is my federal license is under, from that standpoint. And I've always had that out of my house. I've never mixed, I've never manufactured those materials in my house.
I see,
I've
okay.
never stored them. It's very easy for flash powders, 2 components. You measure the components, they can sit on the shelf forever. Until you mix them, there's explosive mixture.
Where do you do your mixing?
Say again?
Where do you do your mixing?
Just right outside.
Oh,
my
outside in the
house.
yard?
Yeah.
I
in the
see,
yard.
I see, okay.
Put the 2 components together, shake and put a fuse on it, and off it goes.
Okay. Thank you.
But you're, I think maybe this was part of your question. It sounded like you've never done this as a business. This is
No.
just a hobby.
I've never distributed, I've never manufactured for sale, and from that standpoint, I've taken part, like I said, we shot the show as volunteers, and that was my license that allowed us to do that. 2002 Olympics, only my license was used for the Olympics in the stadium and for shooting a 24-inch shell up the side of the mountain. In Park City, and scouting events, campfires, rites of passage, stuff where they wanted to add some color, a little bit of noise to the event. And that's always been, the only thing that's been out of it, I've used commercial, Class C fireworks, and the only thing I've ever added is the smoke or the flash and the bang. So I'm sorry to cause you this consternation. Anybody else? Thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the public that would like to make a comment? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment section. Commissioners?
I don't know if this is what you were alluding to earlier, Quan, but whether it's before us or we make a recommendation now and it goes to city council, I think there's no need, it sounds like, there's no urgency to be rushing this through or whatever. Yep. So why not get as much information as possible, not only from what Mr. McGraw is doing, but like what else are we concerned about? Are they legitimate concerns? Are they not concerns? Do they need to be regulated? Do they not need to be regulated? At least for me, I think it would be important to have more information because this is like just a narrow window we've got tonight.
And I agree with Josh on that, and I would add to that, do we need to look at specifically allowing this in places in the city? Is that even necessary, or do we not worry about that and wait? But yeah, I think I'd like a little bit more time to
Agreed.
get some more information, find out a little bit more about what, is this a problem?
Yeah.
You know, is this a problem that we really need to address? Our ordinance does seem to prohibit it at this point. I don't know that we really need to add this level onto it, but maybe we do. Maybe we do, and that's something I guess I need a little more information about.
Can I get opinions from all of my other commissioners? What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, just in listening to our conversation, I feel like we're vacillating between two issues. First, should this be an ordinance? And second, then getting into the specifics of it.
Right.
And so, and to go along with what Wilf just shared, I personally feel like I would need to learn more about all of the ins and outs of this to even make a recommendation to move forward. So my recommendation would be that we table this.
Toby?
I feel the same. I think it would be best, in our best interest to table it and get more information.
Okay. Steve?
And I'd like to know if there's any precedent with other cities in Davis County where they've addressed this issue formally, or if they've done what Wolf said and it's just inherently understood that if it's not mentioned in the code, you can't do it unless you get some kind of exemption. I'd like to know if there's some precedences out there that would help us understand this a little bit better. So I'm all for deferring this for now
Okay.
and finding out more.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to defer making a recommendation to City Council on this ordinance.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay. Start the votes, starting with you, Cody.
Aye.
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 Okay, next item, I believe, is why the majority of you are here, is item number 5, public hearing for the rezone of 478 South Main Street from R1 Single Family Residential District to RM Multiple Family Residential District. I will let staff do the introduction on this one.
All right, as mentioned, we have received an application from Mark Lund and Kelly White. I believe they are here this evening. Okay, I thought that was you. They submitted an application for property that they own at 478 South Main Street to rezone .56 acres, which is currently undeveloped and has previously been used as a community garden. Current zoning is R18, which in theory would allow for 3 single-family dwellings. They are requesting to go to residential multifamily. And with that, the acreage and the square footage that is there would allow up to 8 attached dwelling units. Did want to let the commission know that we sent out public hearing notice by mail to the required 500 feet. It was about 50 notices that were mailed out. Here's just a few photos of the property. This is looking west across Main Street. And then here's looking north across the property. Here's just a regional or a more regional look of the area. Shows a church directly south. Across the street is Davis High School. And then to the north and the east of the site, there are residences that exist. Here's just a zoomed out look again of the area. And then did want to point out with the zoning map that there are a number of zones within a pretty short distance of the site. We have an R2 zone, R4, RM just up the street. We have RD zone, the public use zone, R110, and let's see, that's R114, and then, of course, the R18, which is the current zone. There were a couple of items in the general plan that we adopted in 2019 that supported this type of an application. I wanted to point those out. One of those lies in the goals and policies section under housing, and it states that east of I-15, we would look for housing that's compatible and complementary to existing neighborhoods while considering medium density. That is a clarification that I would like to make with the public. Oftentimes, this feels like it would be high density, but this zone would be considered a medium density. So medium density along major streets and higher density near transit stops and arterial streets. So the currently adopted general plan would support this type of a zone change on Main Street. There also, I'm not sure when this was added into the plan, but several years ago, the state legislature required cities to adopt into a general plan moderate income housing elements that are tied now to funding that we receive from the state. So we, probably in 2018 maybe, I don't know if it was 2019, but we adopted these 3 portions into our 2019 general plan. And it states that 15% of additional housing should be moderate income housing. Traditionally, a viewpoint of townhomes, which would be a project that would be allowed in the RM zone, would be considered more moderate income than single-family residential. So the 3 goals that were listed that I think were relevant to this application, one speaks about zoning properties, specifically mentions rezones to multiple family. The goal number 3 was permitting multiple unit structures in single-family residential zones. And number 9 was to allow for rezones for densities necessary to assure the production of moderate income housing. So with that, and then with a big caveat, I am going to go through the concept plans that were submitted by the applicant. I'm just going to be frank with the council and the public here. This is something that I am not accustomed to doing because in my experience, when we're talking about rezones, we are talking about the use of the land and not a project. A project would come only if a rezone is approved, and that would come at the next stage of the process. So I just want to make it clear that while the applicant has submitted a plan or a concept, this concept it could very well not be what would be constructed if the zone change were to be approved. So
Melinda, before you move on, I just want to call out that what everybody's seeing is a 2019 general plan. That's because the next general plan we're actually working on has not been approved at all. We're still in working groups.
Yeah, that's correct. And I actually had conversations internally about, do we reference a draft plan to, you know, in relation to this application, and ultimately, I don't feel like it would be appropriate to reference a draft plan to either support or not support an application because that plan has not been adopted by the city council yet. So, so that's why I'm referencing the 2019 plan.
The moderate income housing.
Yes, yes, and then this section also was in the 2019 general plan. So the 2020 draft general plan, I have not made any mention of that in my staff report, nor have I in the presentation.
And one, just for clarification, it was 2017 when the legislature
Put
gave
that into place.
that to the cities.
Okay. And then it was 2017, 18 when
It was
people
18 when
finally.
it was implemented.
Okay, all right.
So I think another thing, too, that I want to point out is you brought up a great point, which is, in theory, this application does not need to have a plan whatsoever, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
From a purist standpoint, a rezone, we are talking about uses strictly. A single-family residential zone allows for single-family residences. A zone of multifamily allows for attached residential units. And the density with the acreage on that site would allow for up to 8 units. Oftentimes, you know, people who are looking to develop the land will only want to spend as much money or as little amount as money as they can to determine whether or not they go to a next step. So in speaking with the applicant on this, they knew that they could make 6 units fit. And so that's the concept that they submitted with the site plan that they submitted. But in speaking with them, their intent, you know, if this were to be approved, they would like to look at putting 7 or 8 units. And so, so I would coach the Planning Commission really to look more at the use on this and less at a project. And the determination that you would want to look at when you're making your recommendation is multifamily on this site appropriate given the circumstances, the location. There is buffering on the east side with, you know, a large UDOT facility and a high school. There's buffering on the south side with a church. You know, those would be the types of things that you would want to look at versus an actual project. So I'll just go through these really quickly, but again, the applicant, they knew that they could fit 6 units on the site. If this moves forward with an approval from the city council, they would look at, you know, engineering more to see where the density would fall for a future project. They also submitted some concepts for 2-story townhomes, but also made clear that they don't have construction cost estimates. It's just not something that they're can get at this point, and so they would not know whether or not they would go 2 stories or perhaps 3 stories until a next step in a process if the zone change is approved. That being said, the R18 zone allows for homes to be constructed up to a height of 30 feet. The RM zone has the exact same height limitations of 30 feet. So the existing zone, really, as far as the height limitations, there's no difference between those. So that's really all I had planned to present to the commission tonight. We do have the applicant here in the audience, and if the commission so wishes, they may have more to add, or you may have questions for them.
Yeah, before we move on, again, just to go back to that, in the application, they do not need to submit a site plan, or do they?
No.
Okay.
They do not.
Yep, and I want to call this out to the public because, again, it goes back to the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. So they could have come up here and no site plan, and we would have had to actually vote based on that without seeing any site plan at all. And sometimes we have. So in a sense, it is a courtesy that they're doing. Having said that, if you look at past hearings, we've always asked for a concept just to get an idea. So we want to make sure that it is appropriate. It does fit the surrounding area. So with that, I would like to invite the applicant, owner, Mark Lund and Kelly White to come up, and if you'd like to address us. And again, it's just us, not the public, so, yep. If you can state your name and the address, please.
Picking me up okay here. I don't talk super loud. My name's Kelly White. I am one of the applicants. The other applicant, Mark Lund, couldn't be here tonight. He's away on work. But I am aware that he is watching live tonight on YouTube, and he appreciates the city being able to put that on YouTube so that those who can't come here can still see what's going on. I guess a little background on myself. I'm a small business owner here in Kaysville. My office is located just off Flint Meadow Drive over by Camp Willow. This isn't something, I guess, in my typical wheelhouse. I'm not some big developer by any means. For that reason, my application may be a little different than maybe what the council's used to, but we still wanted to include at least somewhat of an idea of what we're looking at doing, rather than, theorizing what we may or can't do. But as always, I am open to discussion with the council. Any recommendations, the city staff has been phenomenal in working with us and pointing us in the right direction. So I do really appreciate Melinda's time and Dan's time and their patience in meeting with us and simply advising us how the process works. So I really appreciate Kaysville City and what they've done. Are there any questions that the city would like to address first?
Yeah, I think the big one is, I'm assuming you did your homework, read some of the minutes of what we've done in the past, and one of the things that we've always asked is if the applicant has communicated with the public who have issues, concerns. Have you done that? If you can just state what you've done.
So we did come to the last city council meeting, just, I believe it was last week, and spoke with council members, almost anticipating that members of the public would have come before this meeting during the Q&A to potentially have questions. However, that just, no one came. We had discussed knocking doors with the neighbors, but weren't sure how. We were worried about COVID concerns, knocking doors. People may not be comfortable with us, speaking with them even on the porch.
What about leaving a note?
Sorry?
Leaving a note or something like that?
We hadn't, and for that reason as well, we had asked the city council what's kind of typical. This is not something, we do for work.
Right.
But I am more than open to answer questions from neighbors. I have seen various comments being made on a few Facebook groups. They don't want to specifically address those, over the keyboard. I'd rather have a conversation and
fair enough.
discuss the issue.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that we highly encourage. I think anybody that's come through here is have that discussion with the neighbors, or else you have a situation like this, and you're going to have the same at the city council. It's better to address those concerns directly. So,
And if the commission does decide to move forward, we are more than happy to, post a time, date, and place
Yeah.
for those who would want to come out and speak with us.
definitely.
We have absolutely no issues with that.
Okay. And so just out of curiosity,
Yes.
though, why are you looking at this point, why not leave it as is?
As is, sorry?
Sure, I mean, you want to rezone at this,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I mean, you're asking to rezone at this time. Is there a particular reason why? Just out of curiosity, I mean, I do respect the right of the landowner to do what he or she would like to do within the constraints of
Sure.
the law, et cetera.
Yeah, so when we had purchased the property, the initial idea was one, if not two, residential homes. But then we had the concern of whether somebody who wanted to, who could afford a single residential home would want that on Main Street. And so that gave us pause whether that was cost effective. If we could essentially get our money back, but knowing that, someone who does want to have a single family residence wants it on the Main Street corner. And so that's when we started looking through the general plan to determine what the other options are.
And when did you buy the land again?
That would have been, I should have brought the warranty deed with me, but I would say September
Of,
of this last year.
Okay.
Yeah, September, October.
okay, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. White?
What is the intent with respect to the units? Will they be sold? Will they be rented? Will they be both?
Great question. We had approached, well, both the contractor on the cost of even building, whether it be 6 units, 7 units, 8 units, and he didn't even really want to give us great quotes because of the supply chain issue. He's like, well, I don't know what it's going to be like 2 months from now, and if you don't have this even rezoned, I'm wasting my time. Which then led to my issue with the financing. I go to the bank, I don't have a bid from the contractor, and the bank doesn't want to pigeonhole themselves what they'd be willing to finance. And selling versus renting, yeah, the bank's gonna give more money if the asset's producing income. And the bank's gonna give less money if we're simply looking to build and sell. So we are open to both options. I think that would be fair to say.
Can I ask a question, Mr. White?
Yeah.
So, and just to thank you to the public who have submitted comments to the council or the committee. From what I have gathered, some of the biggest concerns come with parking with this type of a project, as well as increased traffic and respecting Melinda's recommendation on not focusing so much on the project. I do think it's relevant. There were several comments that were made that would be more in support of something like this if the entrance to such a complex was on Main Street and not on 478 South. And so I'm just curious if any thought or consideration has been given to that particular issue.
Sure. I'll address your parking issue first. As to the ordinance, upon my review, currently required in the requested zoning is 1.5 spaces per unit. And we're more than willing to provide more than that. In the concepts that we provided, we would like to have 2-car garages for each unit. And we're definitely not opposed to providing additional parking on the property in front of the units should that be necessary. I do understand, I've seen some of these additional parking comments, even tied to its previous use of the garden, meaning people are using the garden, people are parking on the street out in front of it and causing issues. However, I mean, based on my review of what had happened previously, that the garden had been, the use agreement was done in November 2014. So it's been about 7 years since the garden's been there. And to my knowledge, there's been no issues of parking that has come up. And people are parking on the street, not on the property. And until now, that issue's never come up. So,
But I think you're comparing apples and oranges, though.
well, but the property can take the parking.
Right.
The street at the garden does not. So I think it is comparable. We are absorbing the parking onto the property. The garden was not.
Right.
And to that issue, driving down this same street, I would say a large majority of the single residential homes have what I call toys. And their cars and their toys are also in the street. And is their right to put the cars there? I understand that, it's public parking. But I hate to necessarily just point the finger at, well, we can park on the street, but you can't. And we're more than happy to provide additional parking on the property, more parking than would have been provided by a single residential home. So Councilman, to answer your question, no, I don't see the parking is going to be an issue. I don't. As to creating the entrance on the other side of the road with Main Street, we have not approached UDOT yet with that because we felt, why approach UDOT if we haven't even got past the rezone? And in going through the data from the proposed plan, and I know the council doesn't want to make any kind of decisions on something that's been proposed, but the data that was collected shows that at that point in Main Street is actually the widest part of Main Street in the city. It's actually 94 feet wide. So I think if anything, there is ample space for traffic And I understand the traffic concerns are really going to be during school, right? We've got Davis High School there on the main street. We've got DATC right there on the main street. So outside of those hours, I don't think you're going to see a substantial rise in traffic. People are going to be using Main Street and not necessarily using the thorough streets to get around. It's the widest part.
Thank
Is
you.
that- okay.
I'm guessing, I know the answer to this because it's at an early stage, but have you considered, is there any action in motion, or what are your thoughts on if the council or the commission were to recommend and the council decided or whatever, on obtaining a traffic study, just to say, okay, let's get some, let's get a traffic engineer licensed. What are they going to say the impacts are anticipated traffic-wise? Have you thought about that, or what are your thoughts?
I think that would depend probably on cost. I don't know if the city generally puts that on, the developer to do that traffic study. I can't say I have crossed that bridge yet or before, honestly. I'm simply basing my proposal on the data provided by, I guess, this proposed plan. And I can refer to the council to the appendix where it does discuss the traffic areas. And that would be in page 283 through 287. And it discusses traffic in what it calls its, I believe they call it its 3 center areas. They called it the project team identified 3 primary mixed use activity centers in Kaysville.
You're looking at the draft general plan, correct?
Right, but I am looking at the data that they used to come up with the recommendations in the plan. But if the council doesn't want to discuss that, then.
No, I was just making sure that we are all on the same page about what you're looking at.
Correct. And it says that, so they recognize 3 mixed-use activity centers, is what it calls it. And it refers to those 3 places as downtown, Barnes Park, and the Davis High DATC area. And that's exactly where we're at. It then goes on to discuss potential development, transportation, vehicle access. So if the commission would like more information on that, I believe it, I know Melinda said that we're not really making decisions based on the proposed plan, but there is data in there to support that the traffic is not going to be an issue. They've already come up with the data to determine these 3 places are going to be or are already high traffic areas, and that they're planning for that.
Right now, the current zone would allow 3 homes, right? So what we're really saying is, what is the incremental impact between 3, which he'll develop, or 6? That doesn't seem like that big of a difference to me.
Excuse me, please keep your comments to yourself. We do have a public comment here in a few minutes.
Yeah. I can speak from experience. Like, we had a development right across the street from my house where we had an open field, about 2 acres, and there was 28 units built there. And that was the concern of the neighbors, was traffic and safety. And living there for several years after that has been built, I can speak from experience that there really hasn't been no noticeable impact in the traffic. And so, that's going from 3 houses on the frontage to 20, so at 25 units. And so I just don't see that this is that big of a difference from 3 to 6.
Okay. Other commissioners?
Well, I think it might be well to hear from the public before we get into a lot of discussion on this.
Actually, I'd like to keep the discussion within the commission right now. Mr. Kelly, thank you very much. And the reason I want to do that is that gives an idea to the public of, how do we process this? I know that most of the public, this may be your first time. but we basically do the same thing, and I think this may help you when you do come up with your public comments. So I'd like to keep it within the commission at this time. Discussions?
Can I ask a question to staff? So Melinda, and looking at the recommendation, we're looking really at the compatibility of this application with the general plan, and you mentioned in your presentation how it aligns with the general plan. Did you find, and this is coming from the new guy who has not yet memorized the whole general plan,
I'm more new.
but did you find anything where it wouldn't align with what's outlined in the general plan?
I mean, I think that you could probably find information in there that would be counter to the information that supports it. So I didn't necessarily look for that, but I think you could find that if you were looking for it.
I mean, if you look at the language that, that's in the staff report, it talks about allowing these kinds of uses along our major and arterial streets. So from that standpoint, you could say, yeah, but we also have the ability to look at and see how do we feel like it fits into the surrounding area and neighborhood.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wilf.
Chair, if I may, I do want to address a couple of comments that were made as far as a traffic study. That's not something that I would recommend at this point. Oftentimes, the public thinks a traffic study is going to come back and say you should or shouldn't do a project. That is not how traffic studies work. They come back and say, here's the differences between the density and the projected traffic. And then looking at this, yes, there would be a difference between 3 dwelling units, possibly 5, going from R18 to the RM zone. And that's negligible, especially when you're talking about a UDOT facility that carries over 14,000 vehicles a day. In other places I've worked, you wouldn't have a traffic study be required until you get over 50 units, 100 units. It's counterintuitive, but single-family residential units tend to produce more traffic than townhome-type units. If you think about it, there's more square footage, larger families can live there. So it's counterintuitive, but I think a study would come back and it would say, first of all, the impacts are negligible. Secondly, the difference in trip generation, and let me go back. They would be negligible to impacting the current traffic. And then secondly, the difference between 3 single-family residences versus 6 detached or attached dwelling units would be negligible between those two. That's been my experience. I don't know if the commission has seen a lot of traffic studies, but I don't think there would be much value that would come from that. Additionally, because this would be coming into a UDOT facility, the discretion of whether or not an entrance would be on Main Street would be up to them. UDOT does require certain level of studies, A, B, and C level, depending on the size of a project. UDOT wouldn't even require a study for this level of a project. There could possibly be a chance that they might be able to have a right-in, right-out on Main Street, but I don't think UDOT would grant access for a left turn into a property so close to an intersection at 475 South. So I think as far as that, the opportunity to have ingress, egress onto Main Street would be limited and probably unlikely.
Melinda, the ordinance specifies a number of units based on square footage. Has 6, allows for 6 units on 16,800 square feet, and then it says, which to me is a little unclear, it says, and then not less than 2,800 square feet per dwelling unit. Does that mean for any additional unit, another 2,000? I mean, is that what that means?
That's the way I would interpret it. It is a
Me
little
too, but
oddly
I just want to
written.
make sure
I had
that
to read
that's.
through it a few times, but I think that's how we've applied it in the past, And that's
It is,
how,
yeah.
I think that's the most reasonable interpretation of that.
Okay, so that would mean that you could potentially get up to 8 units on this,
Correct.
under this zoning.
Yeah, correct. And that's just not looking at setbacks, not looking at requirements for open
Right.
space or how much parking they would have to provide.
Which may limit then.
Correct.
The number of units.
So, from a practicality standpoint, feasibility with the lot dimensions, 8 may not be,
Feasible.
yes, 7 may not be. They did, I believe, do enough calculating and engineering on that to determine that 6 could fit.
Toby, comments?
No, nothing more than what I've said.
Okay. Wolf?
There was one other thing that I wanted to address. Oftentimes, the public does comment about renters versus ownership, and that's simply something that is not legal for the city to regulate. So
Yep.
that's something that's left up to the project, not something that really we can have any type of say in.
Appreciate that reminder. Josh?
I have a lot of comments, but I will withhold them until after the public hearing.
Yeah, I think I'd echo
So I
Josh
guess
on that.
somebody in the
Same here.
audience has heard you speak before. Vice Chair?
I'll wait until after public comment,
Okay.
public hearing.
Doxy?
Well, I agree with what Wilf said, that our general plan that should get adopted soon and the former plan support more higher density housing on major arteries like what we've got here. So this is a good example where the majority of citizens that replied to the surveys that went out, that this was acceptable. On major arteries where you've got public transportation going by, higher density housing is encouraged.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my personal comments before we open up to the public comments is this. On the surface, on the spirit, it does match the proposed general plan. It also does fall in line with SB 34, again, tying affordable housing to funding from the state. Having said that, we always do take a look at what the public feels about it. So before we open up to public comments, couple of things. Melinda, how many do we have signed up to speak?
So we have a sign-in sheet, but we did not have people sign up to speak.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I'm assuming everybody here is, and I can do fuzzy math, it's a lot of people. Obviously, we're going to keep it to 3 minutes.
Hey, Kwan.
Yes.
Commissioner Allred has a comment.
Yes.
A quick question for staff. I noticed in the staff report you had a blurb in there from the moderate income housing plan. And I know that from my experience is that that is often a very misunderstood term. Can you just explain to the public and the planning commission, if they don't know, what is moderate income housing? Because there's an economic limit based on your county and your, so maybe that might help people understand what moderate income housing is versus affordable, because they're not the same thing.
Correct. Thank you, Commissioner
Middle-
Allred.
middle-
That is something that I had thought of to touch on. There is a difference between what people would typically think of as affordable housing, and that's where there may be some type of a subsidy, whether it comes from pre-tax credits or with the development or tax credit or some type of a subsidy directly to the renter. So you have your traditionally thought of affordable housing, and then you have the concept of housing affordability, which I think really is where this particular project or the moderate income housing would fit. The state requires us to look at the median income of a county, an area, and wants us to be able to produce housing that would fit within that median income. So when and you often hear, well, you know, a townhome at 400,000 is not affordable. And while that may be the case for some people, it's far more affordable than the single-family home that starts at 750,000 or 800,000. I know some of the new homes up in, I think it was Talbot Estates, were saying that those homes are starting at $800,000. So this does give those with more moderate income an opportunity to either have ownership opportunity or even a rental opportunity. And so it falls more in that middle income. And as you know, you look at people who may fit into that area, you know, school teachers may not be able to afford $800,000 mortgage. But you start looking at, you know, an individual town home where ownership or the rent is not based on the ground beneath it per se, but more of the walls within, it does start to become more affordable. Does that help answer the question? Oh, yes, and then each December, we are required by law to submit a report to the state that shows what progress we have made. I can tell you the state does look at that. They look at the cities who are contributing. They look at the cities who aren't. The ones who aren't are labeled as bad actors, and as they go forward through their legislative process, they look at how can they either entice, coerce, or force cities out there who are not, who are not reaching the goals that they feel like we should reach, how we can make those more reachable. And back to the legislation in 2017 when that was passed, having that requirement added into a general plan to include a moderate income housing plan, they later, I think it was later, came back and then tied that to, like, if you don't have this in place, we will withhold funding that then goes to your general fund that you use for roads and those type of things. So there are consequences with not having opportunities for this type of housing within the community. It's something that the legislature has really been coming down, I think, harder and harder on each year. And this year will be no exception.
They're reinforcing it.
Yes.
Okay, so back to the public comments again, 3 minutes. We will enforce it this time just because there's a lot more of you than in the first. I was pretty liberal with that.
Juan?
Yes.
Do you want me to run the timer for you?
Yes, please.
All right.
Yes, I would like somebody else to run the timer. I'm not good with math. I do ask that if you are here together with a family, that you come up together and speak instead of one after the next. That gives other members of your community a chance to speak. And also, just for brevity's sake, if you're going to repeat something that the previous speaker talked about, please refer to that. Commissioners, do I need to put anything else?
If someone's already said it, you can agree with them.
Yeah, that's what I just said, yeah. Okay, great. I'm opening up to public comments. First person, please come up, state your name, your address.
All right, I'm Tim Stevens. I live at 246 East, 475 South. I'm not totally opposed to the request itself. I do understand there's a need for diversity in housing, and we have an affordability issue. I'm not sure I totally agree with the concept that this is just a rezone and we shouldn't consider any other factors in this. When you think about rezoning and decisions that city councils and local government make on land use, they fall into two categories: legislative and administrative. And rezoning property is a legislative act. And with that, it does provide to the city a broader discretion in approving, denying, or even, saying that, hey, maybe we can make this work, but perhaps with a more concrete concept of what it's going to wind up there if we permit this rezone. You know, the drawings that we've seen in that are rather very rudimentary. In fact, they actually show some things that kind of run counter to what you're seeing in development of multifamily. It's usually closer to the street, parking's, and garages are moved away from the street, and they're dominated more by porches and balconies and front doors. So I would say that with that discretion that it does really have some room for us to have a discussion and maybe take some of those things into account. Also, I know there's smarter people in the room than me on some of this stuff, of course, and you have legal staff and your own staff, but perhaps with that legislative discretion, perhaps to set a little more in stone, a more detailed concept of really what's going to happen. I don't know, perhaps the use of a development agreement might be appropriate here, it may not. And then lastly, you know, talking of general plans, you know, if we were having this meeting in California, general plans they're mandated that when you make a decision, it follows that general plan. In conservative Utah, they're more like the pirate code. I think there's, it gives you some leeway in that to deal with things. And so I would agree, yes, we have the 2019 plan. It states some things, but I don't think we should just totally disregard this up and coming 2021 plan. I just looked through it kind of in a cursory manner online. It's well thought out. They've even provided for a outside consultant to work on that. So I think, you know, that should be maybe part of the consideration and the equation. And in looking at
Mr.
that,
Stevens?
just very quickly, I understand.
Mr. Stevens, your 3 minutes are up.
I understand. One more comment.
No,
Just-
I'm sorry, in order to make this fair.
I can make this really quick.
it's
Okay,
up
go
to
ahead,
Commissioner
please.
Stevens.
I appreciate your consideration, Chairperson. In this, I looked at the proposed land use map, and when you zoom in PDF and look at this particular parcel, because it is done by parcel and area, it shows it as open space, and I think we all know that's probably a mistake and an oversight, because it was probably based on the fact that this would be probably a garden, but the city didn't own it. And so perhaps with the staff and your consultant, before this decision is made, maybe they want to do a quick analysis of should this remain yellow and single family, or they may come to the conclusion that perhaps, yes, this would be appropriate for multifamily development.
Thank you,
So,
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you for the time.
When Tim talks about people smarter than him on this, he's been
Yeah, I was gonna
he's been
say,
an urban
yeah.
planner for, what, Tim, now 35 years? More? 36 years, and he knows what he's talking about.
But you're absolutely right, though. I mean, we do look at using development agreements. We have many a times before. I'm sure you've read the minutes. So before the next person comes up, I do want to acknowledge that we did receive, obviously, quite a few emails. I guess there's a rezone protest petition signed by, I think, over 120 people. We acknowledge that. We have read all of the comments, the videos, et cetera. Sorry, I'm going to say next person up. Next. Again, same thing, name, and where you live.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Will Walter. I live at 446 South Main Street. I'm directly adjacent to the garden on the north side. It's interesting that COVID concerns kept Mr. White from coming to my door, but he's sitting right there with no mask on, just an observation.
Well, I think for fair, he was just concerned that the residents might be, so.
We haven't even tried.
Okay.
A couple points I would like to speak to in his petition letter. He mentions that there are 8 different zoning options within a 3-block radius. 388 to 418 South Main Street is a series of R2 zoning. If you drive by those are duplexes, and they are set well back from the street, and they are organic to the neighborhood. They don't change the look, they don't change the feel. 378 South Main is an insurance agent, again, organic. KJH is the heart of the neighborhood, and Three Chapels as well are all part of the neighborhood. They fit the feel and the flow. R2 is not RM zoning. And I think it's important to note the distinction. So just really quickly, chapter and verse in the 2021 draft. I have looked through the appendices, all 390 pages. It's like the guide for a video game I played once back in the day.
We appreciate you reading all the pages, because we worked hard on every single page, by the
I see your
way.
stamp on these, and
Yeah,
I
you do,
appreciate
right?
it.
Yeah,
Yes.
good.
So to Commissioner Doxey's point, the three scenarios presented on page 180 to 182, they all show the west side of Main Street as an area of stabilization. And that area of stabilization is defined as below the city center. If you look in the document, the development priorities on page 188, the things that the citizens of Kaysville want most are to preserve single-family neighborhoods and maintain a community. The survey, I remember taking that survey. I was one of those folks who it showed up to.
And again, thank you for taking that survey.
Well, it informs all of this good stuff. And so the top four priorities: preserving single-family neighborhoods, preserving open space, maintaining Kaysville's small-town identity. I've spoken to several city council members about this, as have all of my friends back here, and they all use that phrase, preserving Kaysville's small town. I'm trying to get to the important point here. On page 38, there is a map defining the city center. You all are probably surely familiar with this because you worked hard.
Yes, very
There
hard.
is a paragraph over here that says residential. It says residential standalone uses are proposed along the eastern edges, helping to create a seamless transition. A mix of yard and row buildings are envisioned, the height and density decreasing as one approaches established neighborhoods. I know my time's up, but you can't tell me this isn't an established neighborhood in a 3-story development. Just being there fits in the flow of the neighborhood and the feel of the neighborhood. Again, I'm adjacent and I have passionate feelings, and I'm trying to keep them in check so the officer back there doesn't have to escort me out. But consideration beyond the money that we get from the state, the money that Mr. White has spent, needs to be given to this. Please listen to my friends. Please listen
Definitely.
to us and consider outside the box.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. And I believe the officer in the back is just here for the Olympic game that was supposed to be televised, so I apologize. Yeah. Next up, please.
There are some chairs up here in the front, if those standing up in the back would like to come and sit down. There's 6 or 7 chairs up here.
Next. Sure, yes, sir. It's okay, please, yeah, you can come up to the podium.
I'll try to keep this within 3 minutes. I know you guys have had time to talk, and he's had time to talk for 10 minutes on fireworks. If I can get through it in 3 minutes, I'll do the best I can.
That'd be great. State your name and where you live, sir.
My name is Craig Carlisle. I live on 358 East, 550 South, which is one house off of Main Street. I have lived there for coming up 36.
Can you repeat your name one more time?
Craig Carlisle, C-A-R-L-Y-L-E. I have lived in that home for nearly 36 years. As far as a home not being desirable because it's on Main Street, is a load of bunk. Okay, I enjoy where my house is. I enjoy the fact that I look out and I have neighbors right in front of me. I have the church, I have the high school, I have DATC. It's incredible. I don't feel hemmed in, okay? I have kind of a unique perspective because when I moved in, there wasn't any light on 550 South. I have called approximately 25 times 911 for traffic accidents. They're on that street. That is a dangerous street. I swore when I moved in, 550 South only went halfway down the block, down through street. When I swore, they put a light in here, I'm gonna move. That's the best thing that happened, because if you try and cross that street, you're risking your life,
Yeah.
literally. That street is a drag strip. If you go down there and you have the police watch it, I hear what the motorcycles and the high school kids and the other people do. That is a noisy, loud street, and that needs to be.
I ride a motorcycle and I don't speed through that area, just for the record, okay?
Okay, well, I'm just saying,
it's dangerous. And if you take 8 homes that have 1.5 cars, I'm sorry, most family cars are now 2 cars, and you have a teenager that adds a 3rd car. Where are these cars gonna park? There is not room on that property. They're gonna park on the street, snowplow removal, they're gonna park in the church across the street, and the picture you showed of the church is full on Sunday. There's no place to park hardly there on Sunday. They don't have a right to park there. People come and visit, people move in and out. There's gonna be possibly 50 to 100 more exits across that street a day, and that is a dangerous street. If you look how many accidents have happened coming out of Davis High School, it's a fact. The second thing is, I'd like to say, is I grew up in a similar circumstance where I lived in a single-family home. Some people came in and built 2 fourplexes, and there was 4plexes behind me, and they didn't keep them up. Now, if they're rental, that's different than selling. If he's selling it, that's individual. But if they're rental, we need some kind of guarantee that these homes are going to be kept in neighborhood quality concerns. The other thing is, if a light is eventually put at that intersection, there will be no parking on that street. I used to be able to park in front of my house, and when they put the light in, they took, instead of 2 roads, they made it 3 with a turn signal in the middle, or a turn lane in the middle, and a right and a left and an enter. I can't park in front of my house anymore. If there's a light put there, which may eventually be there, I don't know, you'll never be able to park on the street. It just won't happen. So I hope you'll take these into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Carlisle, and thanks for the reminder about the accidents. I've seen a lot of those, unfortunately. Next. Why do you look familiar? Have you?
Not sure.
No.
Mark Jensen, 407 South, 225 East, just around the corner from the lot. Couple of things I was noticing as I was looking through the proposal, and I don't blame the developer from trying to go for as best and freest possibility you can be from a market perspective. I understand that. But when you look at all the RMs throughout the city, they're all adjacent to commercial or some other use. And just, let's take that into consideration, right? I mean, just like they've said, yeah, we were shown 6 townhomes, but I was the city engineer for Harriman City for 5 years. I understand that things can change, the market pressures can change. This gives them freedom to put in an apartment complex, et cetera, right? And that's fine, but just know that that's what you're accepting, I guess is what I'm saying. The other piece is, you have a pretty good grade across that. I would be concerned if you go up to 8 units, you're basically turning that into an impervious lot. You do need to take into consideration detention, right? Stormwater is a huge issue, especially where you have a house sitting right next door. And I've seen it. I dealt with citizens pretty much every day that were getting flooded. And unfortunately, those citizens get told it's a civil case, right? That's a tragic situation, especially with an apartment complex, with the kind of funding that sits behind a potential, right? I'm not saying that's where they're going. I'm just saying if that is where it goes, that is a problem. So a couple of observations I had. Otherwise, thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Next. It's a foot race. You won. Somebody won. There you go.
Screenshot's better. I'm going to pull this down because he was taller than me. My name is Doug Heyer. I live on 475 South, and I've lived there for 34 years. I like my little street. I really love the garden spot that was up there. I have to tell you that cars that parked in there during the daytime doing their garden, they were a pain in the butt for us, because when you come up or down the street, if there's another car coming, you have to yield and wait for that car to pass. You can't pass 3 cars across that street safely. So when you talk about putting in multifamily residents with parking for 1.5 cars per house, I've seen those before in places like Logan. Everybody that has 1.5 parking has 2 cars and friends. So the friends end up out in the street, which at this housing, they made it illegal for them to park in the street, so I don't know where they went somewhere else, but I guess if they're going to do multi-family housing there, then you should consider the development to include widening the street to allow for parking along the street so that we can access up and down our street without having to wait for cars to come or go. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Next.
Rich Shaw, I live at 125 East, 475 South on the same street. I've lived in Kaysville for 32 years now. I was actually the first house built in that first subdivision.
Wow.
I had the choice when it was just a barbed wire fence and there's nothing there. Then I moved across the street, so I'm on my second home. I'm over in Columbia Heights. But the reason I'm concerned about this is, first, I moved into an area that was zoned a certain way. Both areas were zoned for single-family houses. I'm sorry, but I say I detest apartments and I detest townhouses because of the experiences I had working for Mountain Fuel Gas Company, having to go through them. I stood in front of an apartment and watched 12 people carried out in bags that were burned to death, and it wasn't their fault. Let's just go back to that. But right here on your traffic calming guidelines, it says improper use of local residential streets can conflict with the desire for safe and peaceful neighborhoods. And one of the things we went to, so we think we have to do a traffic study on this street right here. But we already, do anybody live in that subdivision? Do any of you live in this? Does anybody here live in this subdivision? Any of you live there?
I drive by it every day.
Yeah, that's how, yeah, okay. So nobody actually lives in that subdivision. Nobody actually drives down that street and sees what's on there. Now, I carry a thing in my wallet. I know this is, and don't take anything personal here. I carry something with me. It says, experience is not held hostage or at the mercy of somebody with an opinion, meaning that an experience always trumps somebody's opinion. I've driven that street for 33 years. I know what the traffic is when you get on that corner. Something else I need to bring up too. Did any of you know that that street is actually narrower than 550? Anybody aware of that?
Me.
Okay, there's one. Yeah, because we talked about that. Yeah, I visited with her before. So actually that street, that 465 South, is actually 7 feet narrower, one car width narrower than if you go over to 550. So there is that right there. Nobody brought that up. So that is a narrow street. Then the other thing I had on there too was I have a brother. Everybody has a brother that's a contractor, developer. My brother's been doing this for 40 years, and he's done hotels, he's done medical, he's done everything. Anyway, he actually teaches at DAT, or not the DAT, he teaches at the community college. He's in construction trades. So the first person I called I said, Steve, you know this area, because he's been in my house many times. He knew what the farm was. He's actually done some jobs here in Kaysville. And I said, Steve, you've been doing this for 40 years now. And I said, you know that lot right there. And I says, what is your opinion as a developer and a contractor? This is going to that side of it. He flat out said,
It's her. Just kidding.
oh, okay. He said, that development does not belong on that property for safety and parking. That's coming from a professional contractor and people that build stuff like that. And one other thing I wanted to mention too is it's kind of interesting. You want to plug, and I understand you got to put apartments and density housing in the city of Kaysville. But I took a tour of Kaysville, so I drove probably every street around here in the last few days. I looked at every corner, every busy street, Main Street, down here on 2nd North. I did Angel, I did Flint, I did them all. And I kind of found it was interesting. There is not, on the west side, there is not one multiplex building built on the corner of one of those intersections. Anybody? Not one. Not a duplex, a fourplex, or a sixplex on that side. On this side, there are 3. There's one right here by the library, there's one right there by Warren's, and then there was I can't remember the one I saw down there. Those were all built before I was here. That was 30-something years ago. That was when there was one stoplight in the city of Kaysville. So anyway, I appreciate being able to talk with you. We're opposed to this, you can see.
Yep.
There's a lot.
Mr. Shaw, I'm going to go ask you to,
So, pardon?
just to finish up your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
Hi, so I'm Austin Stevens. I live at 192 East and 475 South. I guess my first point would be kind of what a mistake I think it would be to not be able to reference or at least take into some consideration the plan that we're putting into place now going forward, the 2021 plan, and what a mistake it would be to only look backwards to a established plan that's a few years old that doesn't reflect the desires of the majority of Kaysville. As you guys have probably read in some of the 2021 plan, I mean, the very, very first goal listed under the land use goals and policies is to preserve and protect Kaysville's small town atmosphere by limiting change in functioning neighborhoods and districts. And the 1.1 is preserving the single family neighborhoods, and by redistricting development to models that fit within the existing character. And I think you've probably heard enough from everybody in our emails and in the petition about how we don't feel like this is a very good fit for the neighborhood. But there's a few other points in the 2021 plan. I'm sorry to keep referencing that. I know you kind of specifically said we shouldn't, but I can't help it because it it so much, strongly opposes everything that this development kind of is proposing that I kind of have to keep referencing it. But again, goal 6B on page 155, prohibit high density land uses in areas established for lower density residential uses. The nearest RM zone is actually a half a mile away. I measured it with the Google point-to-point measurement, and that's the one that's adjacent to the general commercial district downtown. And then the other one that's next closest is all the way up at the top of 200 North, again facing a much wider, better access road there. And then I guess we actually, Faye, you probably come to know Faye Yu very well, who lives next door to the lot on the other side, submitted a request for accident reports and found that within 1,000 feet of that property, there's been 157 accidents in the last 5 years. So I hate to keep beating the traffic thing over the head, but that's definitely an issue. And then again, just kind of the whole concept, I was a little bit, I'm sorry, but I was a little bit offended by the idea that there was no effort made by the developer to come and talk to his concerns, to any of us whatsoever. And I'm a little offended that he came in here, and almost immediately started essentially insulting us, saying that we can park our toys on the street, but why can't we allow them to, have a little bit of parking on the street from that unit? And my wife made the point too, sitting here in the meeting, that there's probably one person on that whole street that parks their toys on this. I have no idea what he's talking about when he says that. But yeah, I guess just the last point that I would make is just, I moved here with, my wife, and we have 4 kids, and we moved here, as it says over and over again in the 2021 plan, for the small town feel of Kaysville. And I get that this isn't a massive, 30-unit apartment complex that's going in the middle of a neighborhood, but even just a 6 to 8 unit that just doesn't fit in with the feel of the neighborhood kind of, for me, kind of destroys the whole purpose of coming to the neighborhood. And yeah, thank you for considering our thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Next person, next speaker.
My name is Sarah Love. I live at 475 South. So I just wanted to reference, I know we keep doing this, but the 2021 plan on page 28, it talks about Kaysville's major corridors being 200 North and Main Street, and the stress that is put on those roads because of the access to the highway and the schools. And then on that page, it also talks specifically about South Main Street, and I'm going to zoom this up so I can see it. It is recommended that the current function and general cross-section of this segment be preserved, as it serves an important vehicular connection between I-15 and US 89, and access to destinations such as Davis High School and Davis Technical College. So, I mean, that's the area that we're talking about, and the plan says leave it as it is. So I just wanted to point that out and hope you guys will consider it. Thank
Oh,
you.
definitely. We appreciate the fact that you guys actually read the proposed plan, so we're pretty happy about that. Next. And here we thought nobody read the proposed plan.
I'm Amy Christensen. I live at 522 Laurelwood Drive, just off Main Street. It could have been said in emails that have been sent. I actually didn't read those. But I just was noticing on Main Street that there's some businesses that are there, and they're in single-family type homes that have been converted to a business. And I just really like how that sticks with the hometown feel of Kaysville, that even if there's a business in that area, they're stuck to just the single-family home. So I just wanted to make mention of that. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Thomas Birningham, and I live at 501 South, 200 East, which is around the corner from the proposed lot and within 500 feet of it as well. I received the notice. Thank you. Just a quick comment. I don't believe it's been mentioned before. Well, before I do that, just a quick comment about traffic. It's not so much the traffic that's passing by. We all know there's a lot of traffic passing by, but it's the traffic that will be congested within that short amount of space around the corner from Main Street, just off of that busy street. And in that area, there's going to be significant increase in traffic, if you will. So it's not necessarily the through traffic that we're concerned about. It's the congested traffic right there on the corner of a busy street. The final point that I would make is that the nice thing about living in a representative democracy is that we get represented by a group that's looking out for not only the larger group, but also the interests of the minority. If this was a pure democracy, you know, us here, we're a small number compared with Kaysville. If it was put up for a vote, probably no one would vote for it or even really care. But you can see here the number that do care about this issue, and we ask that you please support our interests, even though we're a small number, but it's very important to us. And I appreciate your consideration, but do ask that you do vote no on the rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Birningham. Next.
Val Starkey, 573 North, 350 East. I submitted a letter, which you've probably seen. I only have one item to add to what's been said. We respect the idea of growth in Kaysville, okay? But that implies there's going to be more growth in the schools. The 3/8 mile diameter circle, including the high school, the junior high, and Columbia, is the only one in Kaysville, and the increase in students has to go up. So the risk to the students and the traffic are going to clash, and so any change has to account for increases in traffic and students and the safe routes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Christian Nielsen. I live on Liston Circle in Kaysville. I come here not as a resident in this neighborhood, but just as mainly a concerned citizen. What I see in Kaysville is a lack of housing for people like my kids. I grew up in Kaysville. I moved out of Kaysville in the early 2000s and returned around 2010. I assume that my kids will probably do the same. I see there's a lot of boomerangs there. So I support this 100%. I believe that we need more housing in Kaysville. I believe that Main Street, Second North are places where we should have R-M. When I look at Layton and I drive through Layton, it seems that they must have a zoning that allows for more units on a per acre basis than Kaysville does, so I don't think this is a major concern. You know, if I were to make a proposal, I would suggest that instead of onesie twosies on Main Street and Second North, that you just rezone the entire thing to R-M and allow that to happen. I know a lot of citizens may not be happy with hearing that, but we do need to have places for people to have housing. On the other hand, I would say that the easiest way to fix this problem is to rezone all residential housing in Kaysville to R-M. And then over time, as people move, you would have the housing needed for people to live in Kaysville. Kaysville's a great place. I enjoy living here. I've bought and have a business in Kaysville. I also have a house in Kaysville, so that's that. I know that we have a lot of neighbors here that are very passionate about this, and I appreciate that. And I think what we do miss sometimes are the people who are agnostic to it or actually support it. I mean, we see this in a lot of things in life where people who are just busy in life and they're like, it's no big deal if they have it there or not, and they don't come here to support it. So I know these are hard decisions for everyone, but I would definitely support this, and with the caveat being we'd like to see more of it in Kaysville. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. Next speaker.
Ross Everson, I live on 475 there, 143, 475. I think an issue here is not so much that we're opposed to housing on that property. That's not, I don't think anybody's really opposed to that. I think everybody's really been resigned to that fact that there's going to be something there at some point. It's just at what level of that housing is going to be and what type. I find it really difficult to be able to change a zoning for that lot without knowing exactly what's going to go there. You know, if it can be up to 8 units built there, I just don't think that that is feasible on that unit. Even though the builder says that they won't do that, we don't know if we change the zone, what's going to happen. So another thing is that thoroughfare, and it's been thoroughly discussed as far as how that curves around and the street is much narrower, and that garden has posed an issue with traffic. Contrary to what the developer has said, it is a major problem when people are over there harvesting their gardens or planting or whatever. It's very difficult sometimes to get in and out of there. That is a thoroughfare also down to the Ponds Park area and Utah State extension down there. People do use that street to flow down through there, and 550 over there as well. That has to be taken into account as well. But that corner right there is a hazard. My own wife has been hit in that, making a turn off and onto Main Street there. So we've got a light at 550. We don't have a light at 475. It's getting very dangerous to be even venturing out on that street right there at some times of the day. So with that said, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. No one else wants to speak? Oh, go ahead. I do expect updates on gold medals from the U.S., so just shout it out anytime.
I'm Laureen Starkey, and it's 573 South, 350 East. And I have 2 neighbors that are Down syndrome. We've spent 2 very frantic hours looking for some of the lost. And those neighbors moved here believing that we are neighbors and we care about each other. And I called the neighbor that We saw one at the police station, and we care about her. She's vulnerable. It was not her, it was her daughter who was run over on crossing 550. She is still compromised. This was December 9th. She and her daughter were crossing in the crosswalk, going across 550 South. Our bishop's ecclesiastical leader's wife was run over and died a few years ago on Main Street. We understand, yes, this is traffic, but this is also lives. And we want to stand as a united front that we will care about whoever comes there. But we've measured the street, and I measured my car, and I tried to imagine trying to get in there. I do not do that street, but it is not just the high school. It is a junior high that has no other access, and it comes down this little street that has no room for two cars to go through at 3:30 in the afternoon. So we're talking about adding possibly 8 more, but if it goes up 3 stories and they have a blank check, why not 28 units? I don't know what they're going to add, and I don't know what the repercussions are. I do care about Isabella, and I will go look for her. And I think that we need to care about the people that are compromised by the traffic that we're adding, and that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Dave Hogan. We built a house on 564 South, 300 East, Kaysville, 22 years ago. And so we've been there quite a while. A couple of my concerns. Lorraine Starkey just mentioned that there have been a number of people that she's known that have been injured or killed in that area. My own daughter has been hit twice in that area during the school year. So there are definitely traffic concerns on our part as citizens. Although some on the council or supporting the council or with the city seem to suggest that traffic is small peanuts and doesn't even deserve any additional traffic study. In addition, I kind of feel like some on the council suggest that pressures from the state suggest that we need to do this. We need to play ball with the state. Indeed, we do need to consider that, but I feel like there's got to be other areas in the city of Kaysville where you could do that, perhaps on a larger scale, and meet more of that quota that is demanded by the state to play that. In addition, I feel like it would easily become a 3-story building with the contention that possibly having 2 car garages for each of those 6, potentially 8 units. So easily become a 3-story building, which definitely does not fit the neighborhood in my opinion. A couple people have also mentioned that this zoning, the nearest such zoning is indeed half a mile away. I think that needs to be considered. Some people seem to contend that it was just part of the area, but I contend that it is not necessarily in that area. Let's see. And I also do feel a little bit neglected in the fact that the developer contends that he would have reached out or was thinking about reaching out, but chose not to. That seemed a little bit not a very good faith effort made to reach out to us citizens that are in the neighborhood. And I think that's about all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. Next speaker.
Hello. Ellen Danes, 285 East, 475 South, 2 houses west of the lot. Kind of piggybacking a lot of what everybody has said, but one of the big things having to do with the height and density of new development to decrease as it approaches existing neighborhoods. I'd also like to make sure that we consider the elevation decrease there. Development company has pointed out, the church is there, the schools are there. Those are yards away from us. divided by a main street on flat land. As soon as you hit 475 South, it starts to decrease. So I feel like that elevation, that 30 feet, is gonna feel a lot higher, maybe 5 feet more from my house. Sorry, I'm kind of nervous.
It's okay.
Also, the traffic concerns are not just during school hours. You know, it's peak hours, beginning, after school, commute, football games, Thursday night basketball games, Saturday events. They have band competitions. Everything is held at Davis High. So it's not, you know, it's not limited to times when one might argue we're all at work. That's just not the case. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So I appreciate you guys hearing our concerns.
Thank you. Next speaker.
And my name is Margarita Hernandez. I live in 572 South Main Street. I've been living in the house for 20 years, happy. My concern is different to most of the people. I live for different reasons, family reasons. I live by myself. And I feel secure because all these people has their own houses, so everybody take care of everybody. But he is gonna make places just to rent. People come and go. So I'm a little worried about safety, you know? When you buy a property, you learn to love your neighborhood, your city, but if you only rent, you don't care. So I'm mostly worried about safety, security, what people is gonna be coming and going. That's the only thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Wenfei Yu. I live in 293 East 475.
Can you please speak into the microphone?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for holding this hearing meeting. I think most of the point has been addressed by my neighbors. So here, I just grabbed the car accident report from the police department yesterday, and I simplified the report by the 202 map. So I would like to leave this.
Do you have a copy for our staff, or is this the only
Yes,
copy?
for you. You
Okay.
can make
Yep.
a copy later.
Okay, great, thank
And
you.
Also, some of the points mentioned
Mhm.
by neighbors have been that, it's just for your reference.
Mhm.
Also, and I want to mention that this, the rezone petition from the buyer, they want to put a RM or R2, R4, whatever into this school, R1 family and the church. That area is kind of a, we can call it a spot zoning. So I don't think it's a good planning mechanism. We better to put some of the buffer zone in between. And so also due to the general plan 2021, yeah, it's a draft, but I guess this is the one this is the one got to be adopted. So it shows that the affordable housing should be focused mainly on the northeast quadrant of this city. So it's definitely not the southeast where the community garden located. And also, you mentioned in the new general plan, the multifamily residential should be adjacent or within the city center. This one, I measured the distance. It's 0.9 mile from the downtown. So I don't think it's within the. This one is not located within the city center. So yeah. So that's just my point.
Okay.
Thank you. And also I want to turn in this petition letter together.
We have a copy of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this one I add some more.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'll turn it to,
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Wenfei. Next speaker. Anybody else? Going once, twice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close public comments. Okay, staff, commissioners, do we need a break or are we going to power through this? What are your thoughts? Okay, we're plowing through. Couple things, writing down numerous notes. I'm just going to spitball some stuff. Guarantee, I think there was Craig talked about how do we guarantee that this will be kept up. Well, really the only way is, from my understanding, is through HOA. Somebody asked about widening the street. Street is 7 feet narrower. Austin Stevens pointed out 157 accidents within 5 years. I'm assuming that is correct. I haven't done research on that. Again, which 5 years? And then, Mr. Birningham, you talked about a small minority. I don't think you are a small minority because the demographics are that neighborhood, so you're actually the majority in this situation. What else? Mr. Starkney, you talked about safe routes. Those are the things I'm calling out or just came top of mind. So, commissioners.
I think there's a few things we need to clarify. I mean, one thing is that there were people kept on mentioning like the height of the buildings, like a 3-story building would be a concern.
Right.
The reality is that the building could be built there right now under the current zoning could be the same height as what it can be built under the RM. So there is no difference in the height of the building, okay? So I don't see that as being an issue. There was a question about there could be potentially be an apartment building built there. I mean, question to the staff on that. As far as like if it's an RM zone, is with the square footage, that will limit the amount of units, right? So that the maximum number of units could be built on that property is 8 units.
Correct.
So there's no possibility of an apartment building.
Well, I think you could build an 8-unit apartment building.
Unless we ask them to
An
agree to
8-plex.
development agreement and.
I mean, it could be an 8-unit apartment.
Yeah, it could be an 8-plex. I mean,
Eightplex, but you can't regulate what.
But would it be that be any much different than what considerations of like a townhomes though? I mean, is that the concern is like that it's an apartment building versus a townhome? I mean, the density is the same, right?
Yeah.
Regardless.
density is the same, looks are different, but in either case, they are both attached dwelling units for the technical term.
So essentially, the density would be the same regardless if it was an apartment building versus a townhome.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so I think those are a couple of key points. That the density will be fixed by the zoning. So that's regardless if it's apartment building or townhomes.
Okay. Actually, before we continue, Mr. White, anything you want to address?
Well, I guess my first question would be, does any members of the council have direct questions for me based on public comment?
Commissioners? Yeah, I guess I would. The first one is, you mentioned that you will sometime in the future, I'm assuming before the next city council meeting, maybe set up a time to speak with your neighbors? Is that still the plan?
I'm
Okay.
happy to
Yeah, I
set
highly
up-
suggest that.
I'm happy to set up multiple times
Yep.
to make it
Might be great.
feasible for during work days, after work days,
Mm-hmm.
weekends. We're absolutely open to that.
Sure. And then obviously, I think the biggest issue or concern that we've heard over and over again is whether it's 6 unit or 8 units, would you consider a development plan to limit it to 6 units? Maybe that would obviously satisfy your neighbors.
I think my response to that would be, assuming less units, higher cost per unit. So if we were able to provide lower cost housing, yeah, that would drop with more units.
Okay. You've heard, Mr. White, about a lot of the accidents. I mean, obviously, staff doesn't feel like we need a traffic study, but, I mean, would you be willing to incur cost of a traffic study?
If the staff, they're the professionals, if they don't feel it's necessary, then I would follow the recommendation.
Okay.
I'd leave that final determination to Dexter, also the city
Right.
engineer.
Got it.
That's something that I would defer to him.
That makes sense. And then as far as quote-unquote guaranteeing the upkeep, could you create a HOA? I mean, is that something on the
If it
table?
went that way, I don't have any issue with that either.
Okay. No, I mean, it's not me that has issues. Obviously, it's your neighbors. I'm just
Yeah, I get
saying,
that.
yeah.
But I think a lot of the backlash with what we'll call renters with tenants is unfounded. I've been a tenant. I've respected my property. I've lived in multi-units. Is it for everybody? No. But does that mean every single renter is, a bad person? I mean, I had seen that in the protest petition form that, they're worried about kids walking by if there's tenants there. And I kind of found that offensive. Tenants are good people. Renters are good people. Not everybody can afford a single-family residence. I actually looked at the MLS 2 days ago. Any guesses how many available homes there are
1,600 statewide.
in Kaysville?
Oh, in Kaysville. I know there's 1,600 statewide.
12.
Yeah.
And the
Usually
average cost?
6, 7.
750.
$1,050,000.
Wow. Yowzers.
12 homes. That's it.
Yeah, good point.
There's nowhere for people to live. And to segregate, other potential residents simply because, other residents don't want them, renters, tenants, it's hurtful.
Commissioners, any other questions?
Yeah, following up on the development agreement notion, would you be open to addressing some of the concerns that neighbors made about your design fitting the design of the neighborhood, showing some sensitivity to that in a
Sure,
development agreement?
I've spoken with Melinda when we went through the plan, and I did also look at the surveys on the types of styles that the residents prefer. And what was preferred was, what we had proposed, was the Craftsman style. We don't want to put some big, ugly building there. No, we want to make nice homes.
So you had a two-story with a one-car garage on your plan that we saw. That
And
is,
we're not opposed-
we don't have to consider that for this discussion,
Sure.
but that, you've got two-story homes all throughout this neighborhood. So you're fitting that, and if it's a Craftsman style, that does fit in with a lot of the neighborhood. So a development agreement would capture some of those elements so the neighbors feel like it would happen because we have a development agreement that says it would happen.
I'm happy to discuss that with staff.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Commissioners? Josh. I see all these notes. Go ahead. You might as well go first.
Okay. Where do I start? So I have just a shotgun of bullet points here that this will be in no particular order. And some I'll just hit briefly or spend a little more explanation on. Yeah, first of all, this is a legislative item, as I think Mr. Stevens mentioned, which means the council ultimately, we are just sort of here in an advisory role in many respects. The council has a lot of discretion here. And you know, reasonable minds are going to differ on this. You're going to have arguments, you know, as an attorney, for example, if someone were to pay me to argue in favor of this, I could go through the existing general plan or the new general plan and find plenty of things in support of it. I could also, at the same time, go through it and find plenty of things against it. So I think it's obviously a close call in that respect. So traffic study, as I say, this is going to be in no particular order. I agree with Melinda's comments about the traffic study. We're talking, as it's requested, we're saying RM. So we would be looking at it and saying the most units that could be on here is 8. Is that going to, what kind of additional impact is that going to put on the roads that will service this development in terms of trips? Right, that's what a traffic study largely looks at, not entirely, but largely looks at how many trips are going to be added to the roads. We've seen traffic studies here. I used to, I wasn't a traffic engineer myself, but I was a transportation planner for a time. And so I have a little bit of experience with this. And my anecdotal guess would be in line with what Melinda was saying, is a traffic engineer, if a traffic study were had, I don't think we should impose that. If a traffic engineer were to come in here, they're going to say this is a drop in the bucket. As an anecdote to support that, and I would just ask those who are here to ask themselves this question. So just down the street, not too far from this proposed development, I would say, let's say 3 to 5 years ago, I don't know exactly when it was, there was the nursing home, the assisted living home that came in on the east side of the road, just before Nichols Road. I think, this is my guess, I don't know this for sure, I think from a traffic study standpoint, that use is going to far exceed the trips added than this proposed rezone. So if we just go with that assumption, ask yourself, have you noticed an impact to your daily drive on Main Street after that nursing home came in? My guess is, and I confess I could be wrong, my guess is the answer is no. Now, again, there may be reasonable minds differ. I drive Main Street pretty much every day. I haven't personally noticed a difference. Maybe other people would notice a difference. So I think this is a smaller impact, and it's not going to probably, short of getting a traffic study that would confirm this assumption, probably not going to change, it's not going to change what a traffic engineer would call the level of service on either 475 or Main Street, or anything around there, actually. So that's, I guess, my thoughts on the traffic study. So I've already mentioned sort of general plan stuff. Density, we talk about this when rezones come up. That's a relative term. In the grand scheme of density, this is still on the, even if it were 6 units or even 8 units, it's still on the lower end of density. So, you know, I recognize that it's a change. It's to Toby's point, though, it's really 3 more than what's existing. And on that note, the parking on the street was mentioned many times. And I think that's a valid concern. I guess the issue that I struggle with on that concern is if this property did not get rezoned and it was just 3 single-family residential homes that could be built on there tomorrow, so to speak, without any citizen input, that's a permitted use currently as it stands. There would be 3 driveways onto 475. And all 3 of those homes could park their cars on the street
unless we're talking in the wintertime, of course, when Kaysville doesn't allow that in basically all public streets for that period of time. But they could park them on the street the day that the homes are finished. So the parking on the street's gonna be there whether it's rezoned or whether it stays as is. So that's, I guess, in my mind, sort of a red herring of an issue. You know, the RM examples that are around, the one that comes right to my mind that we had here recently is this I think was 6 units, and I think the property is roughly the same size. It's just east of the DATC. I can't remember what street it's on, but if you just drove up there, what is it, 275? There was 3 twin homes that were built, 6 units. Neighbors came out just like this. I confess I haven't gone and asked them, but I actually just drive up there from time to time, just to get a feel for maybe how those 6 units have impacted the neighborhood. Granted, I fully admit I don't live up there. I suspect if the residents were being honest with themselves, they would say their concerns haven't come to as much of fruition as maybe they thought. Those are all probably great neighbors now and wonderful additions to the neighborhood up there. Very similar to this. 6 units, driveways onto the street. The difference, though, is that one was actually more in neighborhood. This one's on one of the 2 busiest streets in Kaysville, which says to me that you're going to be less impactful even with this one. So, okay, I'm just going down here. Yeah, I agree also with the point that Melinda made, which is I think we should try as best we can to stay out of the weeds. I know this is another thing that reasonable minds differ on, not just on this issue. Try to stay out of the weeds of the details. We look at the rezone in the abstract. What could go on here? 8 units. Are we okay with that? Are we not? How is that going to impact the neighborhood? Is it going to? Is it not? How? You know, we need to look at it in the abstract. That's what a rezone request is. When we start getting down into the details, we kind of sometimes even could potentially run afoul of what we are allowed to do. So anyway, I guess I agree with that point. The question about possibility of access onto Main, I think that was brought up in, I can't remember who or how many times. My suspicion is, having worked with UDOT and how they review or allow accesses onto Main like this, especially next to 475, which is a through street, they look at the distance, how far away it is from a through street like that. This is far too close, is in my guess. I think UDOT wouldn't even think twice about allowing an access onto Main from this property. It's all going to come on 475. So, and similarly, a light there. I know maybe this was just sort of a passing comment. I don't think there's ever going to be a light there at 475 for various reasons, primarily being it's too close to the one that's just south of it. Here's really a big question that I think, this will be my last thing, that really drives kind of what I'm looking at. I think we could all generally agree that housing is needed. One of the reasons, not just in Kaysville, nationwide and certainly in Utah, one of the reasons, among many, that housing prices are what they are is supply. We just don't have enough. Especially in Utah where people want to live, and especially in Kaysville where people want to live, which if you look at the draft general plan data, one of the many good points of data we got is 80 plus, close to 90% satisfaction of enjoying living in Kaysville. People like to live in Kaysville. We all love it. Everyone up here and all of you out there. We want to live here, but there's not enough places to live and buy or even rent. So if we have to address that problem by increasing the supply, among other things, where should things go? Where should additional units go? And if we're going to have relatively more density, which is, as I said, this is not overly dense. Let's call it medium density, like Melinda said. Where should it go? Well, I think we would all agree that it shouldn't go in the middle of this neighborhood. If you go, 400 yards west of this location, we shouldn't put duplexes there. We shouldn't put them in the middle of somewhere else where it's established in all directions for several hundred yards, single-family detached units. But what about right on one of the busiest streets in Kaysville? Not surrounded, close to, it's got single-family units by it, but it's also got other uses. It's got the high school, it's got a church. If we don't want to put it here, where else do we put it? Like, I ask that question and I say, this seems like if we're going to pick it somewhere, which we don't want it to go anywhere, but if we have to pick somewhere, we have to increase the units somehow. Maybe this is better than other places. And so that really is kind of the sort of answer to that question, kind of pushes me towards maybe not saying 8, but 6 seems fair in this location, and it will change the use, no doubt, but it's not going to change it so drastically as to, fundamentally alter the character of this spot. So that's all I've got right now.
So I would echo a lot of what Josh was talking about. I look at the things that our plan provides for, and Josh has talked about this some.
Wolf, can you give me a second? So just if the public is wondering, we're not talking to you, we're actually just talking amongst each other. That's what we're doing, so thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're just discussing at this point. We do have provisions in our general plan that talk about the need for some variety of housing, places where those might be appropriate, and this location fits. And I apologize to my two compatriots over here. I feel like I'm turning my back to you by talking.
Toby's used to it.
We're listening. Yeah. We're listening.
So, I think it's worth considering. You're talking about one property, but if you're gonna do it someplace, our plan says do it along a major street. This is a major street, not in the middle of a neighborhood. This is not in the middle of a neighborhood. You've got other high impactful uses in the area, so that to some extent it's not like it's an impact all by itself. And I would even question with the densities that we're talking about, it's not going to be that much of an impact. Because the number of units we're talking about is not that many. I look at the zone that's requested, and I think there may be some things that maybe we can look at some different options. Because I personally feel like it's what's being asked for, which is essentially to put some additional units here than what is normally allowed under the single-family zoning. I don't see that as being out of line. I really take to heart what Tim Stevens talked about, which is when you talk about additional densities, a lot of times what really makes or breaks it is how it looks, how it's designed, and how do we address that. Unfortunately, our code is not real strong on being able to look at design. And I think because of that, we have gotten to the point, as a number of other communities have, of doing development agreements with rezone requests. We can get in the weeds on that. Melinda and I have talked about this, and others have Josh has brought this up as well. I'm not a big fan of doing rezones, especially for small projects, by development agreement, because I just think there's I won't get into it right now. We don't have time. It's already 9:30. But we could do it through, if it were a PRUD overlay, we'd have a little bit more control. But again, we're talking about a relatively small piece. What's the difference between putting 3 homes or 6 homes on there? It's not going to be that much of a difference in terms of the impact on the neighborhood. And so what really becomes critical at that point in my mind is, what does it look like? How does it fit into the community? And Josh mentioned the twin home development that went on up there. I agree. I think if you were to go to talk to the neighbors now, they would basically say, yeah, it's not a problem. We had that situation. We've got the development that's up here on North Main. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a multi-unit development there.
Tasties.
That was vehemently opposed when it was first proposed.
We had another one on the corner of Mutton Hollow that was proposed, if you all recall. We had people that came in that evening, and a couple of them said, well, yeah, we have a project like this down the street, meaning this other one, and they said, yeah, it's great now, it works fine, but this one may not be. Well, really? You know, they probably will work out just fine. As I look at some of the options, and I've looked through our code and our ordinance, I mean, rather than the RM zoning, I mean, an option would be the R2 zoning.
Okay.
R2 zoning allows for 2 family dwellings on 8,000 square foot lots, which would mean you could create 3 lots here and get 6 units and build 2 family dwellings on each one.
I mean, that's the one by the DATC. You could more or less, with R2, copy and paste that here, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so you wind up still with 6 units, but at least, you know, now we have a little bit more of it's considered to be a 2-family dwelling, which likely is going to wind up being developed to look like a house.
There's going to be space between them. That's what those are, you know.
Between each of the 2 sets of units.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that's maybe an option to consider. Something, it gets close to what the applicant is asking for, but maybe it meets a little bit better the needs of trying to fit it into the neighborhood and the character of the area.
You have R2 down the street.
Yeah. So those are my thoughts. That's kind of where I'm at on this.
I think, kind of echo Josh a little bit, I think the impacts are, you know, my friend lives next door to those 6 that were put in on 250. And she said the biggest impact was construction for about 3 months. But they like the neighbors. I mean, it hasn't impacted them significantly with traffic. But I think, you know, ultimately, we have to, you know, look at what the impact, or what the applicant wants and figure out what meets the zoning. So there we are.
You know, and just maybe something I was going to add, but I didn't think of again until just now is, some of you may have been familiar with the Utah Foundation recently put out a report, a series of reports based on missing middle housing, it's called, which is essentially you get more units, but it still looks like neighborhood housing. So you get duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, but they still look like housing. They look like the neighborhood. And Envision Utah did a survey, and in their survey, they asked people, what's the most important factor? And for a lot of people, it was the look or the appearance of the development that goes in. Well, if you can get somewhat higher density that looks like housing, residents seem to be a lot more accommodating or a lot more okay with that. You know, if we were able to accomplish something like that, particularly at this location, which seems to be appropriate for what our plan says is where we may want to put these kinds of opportunities, then it kind of seems like we've accomplished a number of our goals.
I agree. I think having just done the analysis of impediments for fair housing for the county, I think, you know, we are short on affordable and middle of the market housing. I mean, growing that across multiple boundaries is.
There's no question it's a big issue.
It's a big issue.
Yeah, big issue right now. Yeah.
With the R2 idea, I guess a few things that we would need to clarify. We couldn't necessarily say, I mean, I suppose the council could do this. I don't imagine they would. But let's say we said, okay, we recommend denial of the RM, but we would recommend approval of an R2. Well, that's really the applicant's prerogative to request R2. We wouldn't necessarily, I don't think we could, but I don't think we necessarily would just say, well, we don't care what you say, we're going to do R2.
Well, I think the way you might do that is to say, just hypothetically now, the applicants requested RM. After our discussion, I think, you know, we'd say we would recommend denial of the RM. But as an option, we might recommend that the applicant and the council considered another zone, like R2, for these reasons. That's not saying, you know, that the applicant has to go for that, but it's something they may want to consider.
This just echoes something you've already said, but one thing I think that lends in favor of that being a little more palatable, potentially, is if you have, again, the existing zone allows for 3 single-family dwellings. That means you would have 3 buildings, each with their own setbacks, side yard setbacks, And so the look from the street as you come around the corner is going to be 3 separate buildings. Granted, one sort of maybe 2-car garage for each one. If you have R2 and there's 6 units, but they're 3 separate buildings, it looks and feels the same, especially if you do the architectural treatments right. So, you know, that seems like it could be a viable compromise, but, you know, now we are getting kind of into the weeds of beyond what sort of a rezone request dictates.
Commissioner Doxey?
Well, I lived in this neighborhood 15 years ago for 1 year, and while we built a house, many of the people that spoke up today are friends, and so I'm sensitive to their feelings. And we actually almost didn't move into the house we built because we love this neighborhood so much. So this is a wonderful area with wonderful people. So I'm sensitive to the concerns that people have, but I'm also concerned. The average price house in West Kaysville is over $1 million. That means maybe 3% of the people can afford it. The average price of the subdivision we approved up on the other side of Highway 89, that the developer told us would be maybe $400,000 to $500,000, is now starting at $800,000 on, I think, 6,000-foot lots. At $800,000 starting. And so, in this case, you know, the owner has the right to, whatever rezoning gets approved, he has a right to make any money that he can make. But we have a housing crisis in Kaysville, we have a housing crisis in Utah, and less of our kids can afford to live where they grew up, and they want to live where they grew up. We have to find better solutions, and we have to be reasonable about it. The state legislature is talking about overriding all the city zoning laws because this is such a crisis in Utah because of the way the zoning laws are that don't allow more affordable housing. So I'm for reasonable solutions that allow people to live in areas that they grew up and love to live in. And I'm sensitive to what the neighbors have said, and I like the comments made that maybe we can consider a different approach that, with a design that fits the neighborhood better, is sensitive to the concerns that have been mentioned. But we have to solve the housing crisis in Utah, and we can't be catering to the 1% to 5% of the people that can afford an $800,000 or up house. That doesn't help any of us.
Yeah.
You know, maybe one suggestion, and as Josh has pointed out, I mean, the request is for the RM zoning.
Yeah.
And can we make a recommendation for something else? Maybe we're stretching it a little by doing that. Maybe the thing to do at this point is to table this and ask the staff to have some further discussion with the applicant if there are other options they may be willing to consider based on some of what the discussion is here that we've had tonight.
Yeah.
That is one option.
So I agree with most of what's been said by the commission. The one thing, and in reading the comments and hearing the comments, to me, I still am not settled. I think the greatest impact, and I think that it's a valid concern, and maybe disagreeing a little bit with Commissioner Sunloff, is the parking issue. I recognize and agree that, yeah, 3 houses could be built right now and they could park on the street, but I think the impact is very different between 3 homes and up to 8 different units. And just, I don't live in that neighborhood, but I have experienced the parking issues in trying to navigate and get down that thoroughfare. So that's the one thing that I think is still a hang-up for me as far as the impact, considering this. Totally agree that where should we put higher density housing? Absolutely, that's a great place. But on that very particular corner, with the dynamics of that area, with the church, with the high school, with DATC, I think that is a very valid concern.
One way to address that may be just to as the plan for the whatever is going to be built there is considered, to require additional parking off-site, or off-street, I should say. Off-street.
And so that, with that, I think the conversations that we started with in this portion of our discussion of a development agreement, and I'm guessing that's how you would approach that resolution.
Commissioner Bars?
I agree with everything that's been said, so yeah, I don't really have anything else to add.
Okay, my thoughts. Commissioner Sundloff, who is way smarter than me, I disagree with the fact that, well, first of all, this is different. You're talking about the Whisper Cove Assisted Living, and it's half a mile down the street, so it's quite a ways. It's not in their neighborhood. Yeah. As far as staying out of the details and the weeds, we did get into it. I think always about the right of the owner, and think about it this way. Your situation may change like this, and you own your property right now, and should you need to do whatever you need to do to take care of your family financially, what kind of precedent does this set? It is different because you're you know, to the applicant, it's not an empty lot. It's a community garden that you're changing to housing. So yeah, there's definitely some issues there. And then I definitely agree with the vice chair on affordable housing, specifically for transitioning veterans. I've got a first sergeant United States Marine Corps decorated who's going to retire, and I would love for him to come to Kaysville. I just don't know if he could afford it. Yeah, homeless is a big issue. Vice Chair and I participated the other week in the point-in-time homeless count. We were up at 2 o'clock in the morning every single day from Thursday to Saturday. It's an issue. So all those things. So now, I guess before us is a choice between tabling or rejecting. Also, tabling gives the applicant a chance to properly connect with his neighbors. Rejecting, if we did reject that, I definitely would support us making a recommendation or two. I know that it may be unusual, but I'm okay with it. So, my thoughts. Anybody have a motion?
Yeah, I'll try a motion. I would move that we table the request for the rezone to RM at 478 South Main Street to a future meeting to be determined, with instructions to the staff to engage with the applicant to see if there are other options that they may be willing to consider. You know, depending on whatever answer, I mean, we can certainly come back and take a vote on the application as is, but I would like to see the staff and the applicant maybe explore some other options first and see if there's something else that might work. Okay. So that would be my motion.
I'll second it.
We'll start off with Commissioner Doxey.
Aye.
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 Okay, so decided. Just out of curiosity, if, let's say, just thinking out loud, if the applicant came back and still presented in the same way, making no changes, I'm curious, how would you guys vote? Personally, I would say no. I would vote no, just to let everybody know.
I'm not gonna
on the
say
record,
it.
yeah. I would say no. So I'm just curious if everybody wants to.
I'm going to hold the cards close
Okay.
to my vest and not say
Yeah.
yet.
I mean, if it's like that, I would say no. And it's a tough one for me. Like I said, I think about the right of the owner, and I think about everything else. But yeah, definitely I would support an R2, though. All right. Having said that, thank you, everybody, for coming in here. Moving on. Actually, we have a call to the public. Anybody want to just say anything? Seriously, yes, sir, please. Yeah. Again, 3-minute time limit, please.
Again, my name's Craig Carlisle, 358 East, 550 South. I think there's two things that really concern us, or three things. One is the parking. If you have a sixplex with one garage, where are you going to put the rest of the cars? Nobody has one car anymore. Most families have 2 or 3 or 4 cars. If you have 3 duplexes, you're gonna have one-car garages. You're gonna have the same situation. It may look a little better, but there's still parking. That street is not wide enough to have cars on the street, and there's not cars on that street. You go up and down that street right now, other than where the garden was, there's not parking on the street by hardly anybody. If there is, you can't get down that street. I can't park in front of my own house anymore, and I'm on 550 South, and it's a lot wider than that street is. The second thing is, if they're going to be rented, which is more than a mortgage payment usually, secondly, are they going to be sold? If they're out for sale and it's going to make the neighborhood more stable, I think everybody here would probably say, we might consider that if it looks right. That's an option. The third thing is water, okay? If it's that many properties and that much parking put on the property of asphalt and no green space, and you got roofs, and it's illegal, at least, and you can back me up on this or tell me if I'm wrong, it's illegal to put runoff water in the sewer.
I think Gardner
Is that correct?
10 to 15%.
Rainwater that comes off the house and off the property, you can't duct it in the sewer. That's illegal. So where's that water going to go? It's going to funnel down to the southwest corner. And there's a gentleman that lives there, and he's going to have flood issues. Something has got to be done to address that if that much property is going to be put there, because it's going to be covered with blacktop for extra car parking, the roof, the cement, it could be an issue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carlisle.
Annette Allred, I live at 277 East, 475 South. Mr. Sundloff, when you talk about the nursing home over in Whisper Cove, how many of those people really drive a car? And they have adequate parking. They don't park on the street when they come to visit those people in the nursing home. If they were 3 homes, there may be parking on the street, but not likely. The townhomes east of the DTC, beautiful, think they look great. I'm not an architect, but I don't think they're 3 stories. So in my mind, I think they're beautiful, and they work in that area, and they are not on a main road, and they're not next to the high school. And as far as access from Main Street, there's a turning lane the whole length of that lot. So there's no way the UDOT would allow access from Main Street into that lot. There's people that park in that turning lane now whenever there's a high school, and it's really difficult to get in and out of our road. And again, if you drive down that road, which it sounds like Mr. Branch you do, there's a major curve on that road, which makes it very difficult to see what's coming as you get around that curve. And again, the slope to that road. I appreciate all of your listening to our comments. I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you considering, and I hope those that have made comments that sound like their mind's made up, I hope you would reconsider.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comments?
Just 2 quick things. Will Walter, what's my address? 446 South Main. 446 South Main Street. Sorry. 2 things. You questioned the time frame on the accident report. We filed a records request from Kaysville PD.
Yeah.
That is 5 years back from today.
Okay, appreciate it.
1,200 feet around the center of the community garden. 157 accidents. Think
Wow.
about the Davis Cup.
Yep.
The regional track thing.
Yep.
I mean,
Band, yep.
you guys know.
Yep.
And then this is anecdotal, but since we're playing in anecdotes, this is Zillow, and this is the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a single 800,000 million. I see a lot of 4.5, low 5s. This is an older neighborhood. It's established.
Yep.
It's not the McMansions in West Kaysville. It's not the stuff up on the East Bench. It's old Kaysville. And it's a different thing, to your point. It's different. And so the paradigm is different here. It's not in aggregate, we need more housing. Yes, we do. Absolutely, sure. The R2 is a perfect solution because it gets us six new dwellings, but it's organic to the neighborhood in that form. A row house is, this ain't San Francisco, guys. And
Thank
you know,
God.
yes, I would lose my view of the mountains out my living room window with a row house, but that's not the point of this. It would, and am I not part of the neighborhood, even though I'm Main Street facing? I go to church with these people every Sunday. They know me, they know my kids. I'm part of that neighborhood. And this plan as presented, and yes, it's been tabled, but the plan as presented kind of dulls the neighborhood feel. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to keep it down to 1 minute now since we are at about 10 o'clock and that's past my
Nielsen,
bedtime.
Listen Circle, I think you have my address.
Yep.
I just wanted to make a comment. There was a couple comments about renters. You know, one of the things that I had to deal with when I got divorced was I needed a place for what I would call transitional housing, right? Where I had to move out of a house and I had to rent for a few years. And so when I hear the term renters, that's me.
Agreed.
Even though I consider myself making a pretty decent income, I had to look for a place to rent than to reestablish myself as a homeowner. So I think that we should, I mean, we started out the meeting saying we shouldn't consider renters, but that
agreed.
did come up, and so I just want to say that.
We usually don't.
I know, but it was brought up a few times.
Sure.
I just want to say that I've been a renter and I've been a homeowner both. So
Yep,
thank
same
you.
here. Thank you.
John Love, 172, East, 4757. So just to, address and echo.
If you don't know your address, you don't get to talk.
Well, I get up and your mind goes blank, right? So, I've also been a renter, even in this area, this same neighborhood. And, to echo Commissioner Doxey's comments, it's a great neighborhood. Regardless of what happens with this particular lot, the folks that live there, renters, people that purchase, they're going to be welcomed into the neighborhood, right? We're not going to ostracize them or anything like that. We're going to welcome anybody that comes in. One thing that I do want to just call out at the very beginning of the meeting, one of the things that the commission discussed was that the rezone and the plans that were submitted, the rezone can happen independent of whatever plans are submitted. And so while we are giving consideration to Mr. White's plans and that sort of thing, obviously if something were to happen in his particular project and not able to be completed as he planned, that rezone of putting it into an RM could absolutely change the future of what's established there. So I just want to have that into consideration. Love the potential option of an R2. I think that would be a very great compromise for our particular neighborhood. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Ellen Danes, 285 East, 475 South. I do just want to piggyback. The R2 is really appealing. You know, we all know it's growing. We all know there's a need for houses, and it's going to be developed. I don't think any of us are against that. I think the idea just aesthetically fitting in of like 2 units together, separate building, 2 units, I think that's extremely appealing. If that's something that the developer would be open to, or I don't know, development agreement, how that would work. And then I do just also want to point out there is value in multifamily homes in neighborhoods, you know. Single family homes. I couldn't go back to where I grew up. We can't afford it. But we worked our butts off to come to Kaysville, to come to single family. You know, the community garden was great, but we're excited, like he just said, to welcome new people into the community. But I just want to make sure it doesn't get lost in translation either.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public comments. Number 7, staff reports, correspondences, and calendar.
Yes, we're going to have our planning commission meeting time on Thursday, February 24th. Serve as training that's
Yes.
been lined up over in Clearfield. So if any of you have not registered and want us to, it is super easy, but we can submit a number of how many people we are registering. So Mindy and I plan on being there.
Yep.
We would love to see all of you there.
Agreed.
We'll also make sure that our alternate commissioners have an opportunity to go. We've invited the city council, so
Good.
look forward to that.
Great.
And then we will.
This will be a multi-jurisdiction, I mean, it's Layton, Clearfield, West
that's
Point,
right.
Yeah.
Clinton. I think all of those communities are invited, so it should be a fairly sizable group.
Yeah, and it's great to network and get exposure to other, our neighboring communities and their commissions. And so we will then have, our next meeting is at March 10th.
Yep.
And I know right now we have one application that will, a rezone for that meeting. We may have a second one coming.
Maybe this one.
Yes.
Be back.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's really all I have.
I've got a question for staff. So, Melinda, a while back, the city went through, and we've talked about this a little bit, this UDOT Main Street effort, and they've developed or are developing a proposal that was based on all of those discussions. I would really like to see, and the discussion was that they were going to come to the city council and talk about that. I'd love to see them come to the planning commission too and talk about that. Do we have any idea where they're at on that? It's sure taken them a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we could have discussed at a planning commission meeting. I don't see a reason why not.
Yeah.
I think there has been a little bit of a lull because of the holidays and also maybe the changeover with this position. My understanding is that they have they have put together what they've called a preferred alternative, which is essentially is, if we had all the funds in the world, this would be the best option to, to have Main Street look and feel this way. They were waiting, I think, for the next steps on the plan. They were getting some high-level budgeting cost estimates for that. And I think when I talked to them about 2 weeks ago, they thought they might get those cost estimates in about 2 weeks. So we're at that point where we should be able to have all the pieces coming together to a point where it's something that we could look at and present.
Okay. Great.
Anybody else? Do I hear?
I'll make a motion.
Steve's got it.
So moved.
Nobody wants to.
Whatever, I said 10:35, you guys you still have some time.
Hey, Josh, we'll still.
Yep.
We'll sit.
Yeah.